My parents left me with my grandparents for my siblings' sake. Years later, I planned a special dinner, but they prioritized my brother's gift instead. I'd like to make it clear that I've never been the favorite child in my family. This is not an exaggeration or a fake idea that I made up. It is a very genuine and major component of my existence. Growing up, my parents never concealed the fact that my younger brother's life was more important to them than mine. For reference, my mother became pregnant with my brother only a year after I was born. While it was not a planned pregnancy, my parents were pleased with the prospect of expanding their family. However, their delight swiftly changed to dread when physicians did several tests and revealed that the baby may have major health difficulties. These were not trivial worries. They were serious enough that my parents had to consider the sad decision to terminate the pregnancy. They eventually agreed to continue, fully aware of the potential hurdles. When my brother, Jackson, was born, their concerns were realized. He had serious heart abnormalities that necessitated prompt treatment. My folks were distraught. Jackson needed many procedures to survive and spent extensive time in the hospital. His health became the primary focus of my family's life, and this transition had a significant impact on everything, including how I was treated. My parents were obsessed with worry, love, and guilt about Jackson's health. While I recognized that they were dealing with a really tough situation, it also meant that I was largely marginalized. My parents were too preoccupied with Jackson's medical demands, so I stayed with my grandparents while he was in the hospital. During this time, they paid me just occasional visits. Even at such a young age, I tried not to hold it against them. I recognized that Jackson's health came first, and my parents were trying their best. Besides, I really liked my time with my grandparents. They were nice and attentive. Every morning, my grandma made me breakfast, and we spent hours doing simple things around the house, like baking cookies or taking care of her garden. My grandfather used to take me to the park and read me stories. They filled in the gaps left by my parents' absence, becoming almost like a second set of parents for me. Jackson's condition gradually improved, and my parents were allowed to bring him home from the hospital. You'd assume this would be the point where my parents would come to get me, where they'd like to reconcile the family, but no, it was not the case. My mother, still burdened by the stress of Jackson's recuperation and the effort of caring for a sick child, decided she was not ready to take on the responsibility of two children. She informed my grandparents that they would need to continue caring for me for a bit longer. My father, who was preoccupied with work and attempting to balance Jackson's medical expenditures, also provided little assistance. My grandparents, who genuinely enjoyed having me around, didn't say anything when my parents opted to leave me with them for a longer period. They were delighted to keep me with them. While I was saddened to learn that I would not be returning home, I was not devastated. I was still in a location where I felt loved, which reassured me. The true issue arose when years passed, and my parents still showed no desire to bring me back home. What was supposed to be a temporary arrangement lasted eternally. I could only visit them every other weekend, and that wasn't guaranteed. My father was sometimes too busy at work, and other times they simply did not make an effort to visit. My grandparents were my primary caregivers, while my parents felt more like tourists than parents. When I first started school, my grandparents took care of everything. They dropped me off in the morning, picked me up in the afternoon, and were there from the moment I awoke until I was tucked into bed. They made sure I got my school materials, assisted me with my homework, and kept me healthy. In contrast, my parents never checked on me. They didn't care if I went to school every day or how well I did academically. If I was sick, my grandparents would look after me. My grandparents seemed to have taken on all of my parents' obligations. When my parents came to visit, they only talked about Jackson. They would tell my grandparents how amazing Jackson was, how brave he had been while recovering from his surgeries, and how far he had come. I don't think they ever asked my grandparents how I was doing, what was going on in my life, or how I felt. I started to feel totally invisible. I can't remember a single instance when my parents and I spent time together, just the three of us. There was no one-on-one time and no attempt to repair any bond with me. It was always about Jackson. Then came the moment I'll never forget, Jackson's birthday celebration. My parents organized a great celebration for him because he was doing so well. They invited everyone, friends, family, and neighbors. My grandparents brought me along. Throughout the celebration, I couldn't get over my intense envy as I saw Jackson so joyful, with my parents doting on him continuously. The entire celebration revolved around him, and while I understood it was his special day, I couldn't help but feel entirely excluded. I was a youngster as well, but my brother received all of the attention, love, and care that I craved. I'm not sure when or how, but the strong feelings of witnessing my parents around my younger brother surfaced. Before I knew it, I had broken into tears in front of everyone. I remember feeling so embarrassed in that moment, knowing that everyone could see me unraveling. My grandparents, bless their hearts, promptly brought me to a room and attempted to console me, but the pain and jealousy were too great. I believe some of the other visitors noticed and attempted to console me, but nothing genuinely improved my mood. It wasn't about the gifts or the party. It was about the attention and love I so desperately craved. Watching my parents lavish Jackson with attention and love was simply too much for me to stomach. Later, after the birthday party, my parents and grandparents had a heated argument. Apparently, my parents were embarrassed by my emotional outburst at the celebration. They thought it was foolish of me to cry in front of everyone, and they believed my actions had drawn unwanted attention to them. It wasn't simply that I was irritated. It had caused others to doubt my living circumstances. Guests began to question why I wasn't at home with my parents, why I was being raised by my grandparents, and if my parents were abandoning me. My parents were unhappy with the scrutiny and blamed me for forcing them to explain themselves. Following the disagreement, a decision was made. I would return home to live with my parents. This was something I had wanted for years, but when it finally happened, I didn't feel as excited as I had hoped. Instead, I felt apprehension. The first few days back home were incredibly awkward. The house felt foreign to me, and I frequently felt out of place, as if I were invading someone else's territory. My parents designed their routines entirely around Jackson's needs and schedule. They rarely acknowledged me, and when they did, it was always in passing. I had imagined that moving back home would finally make my parents notice me, that they would care about me as much as they did about Jackson. However, it soon became evident that nothing had changed. Jackson was still the center of their universe, while I remained on the periphery, disregarded and forgotten. I was merely happy to have my own room. I spent the majority of my time there when I wasn't in school. I didn't want to be alone, yet being around my parents made me feel even more inconspicuous. At least in my room, I didn't have to watch their devotion for Jackson while I went unnoticed. I'd spend hours there completing my homework or lying on my bed, trying to make sense of everything. Throughout my scholastic years, my parents exhibited no interest in my studies or accomplishments. They never asked about my schoolwork or attended any of my award ceremonies. Even when I participated in school plays or extracurricular activities, they didn't bother showing up or acknowledging my participation. It seemed like nothing I did mattered to them. Despite their utter disregard for my accomplishments, I made an effort to excel in school. My grandparents' limited attempts to intervene and remind my parents of my accomplishments were received with silence or plain disdain. They would push my parents to express their happiness or gratitude for me, but they either disregarded the suggestions or scoffed, as if my accomplishments were unimportant. It stung so much to see how little they cared, especially given how they handled Jackson. Jackson never did well academically. He struggled in school and frequently got into trouble. He would bring home poor grades, and his teachers would occasionally call home to discuss his behavior, but none of this seemed to bother my parents. They never held Jackson responsible for his lack of effort, and they certainly did not chastise him. If he ever managed to score even nearly average on a test or accomplish something minor, my parents would praise it as if it were a monumental feat. They would order pizza or take us out to his favorite restaurant, making it a huge family outing. When I finally finished high school and was accepted to college, I was fortunate to receive a partial scholarship. Even though it paid some of the fees, I was concerned about how I would handle the remaining bills. At the time, I asked my parents if they had set up a college fund for me. Part of me knew the answer, yet I felt compelled to inquire. As expected, they promptly informed me that all the money they were saving was for Jackson. They stated he was the youngest and would need to be cared for in the future. My father openly informed me that as the oldest, I needed to learn to take care of myself. He did offer to assist me in applying for an education loan, which I would then be responsible for repaying once I found work. It was quite painful to learn that my own parents continued to disregard me. While most parents are delighted and proud to assist their children in their transition into adulthood, mine were practically telling me I was on my own. Fortunately, my grandparents saw this coming long before I did. They had been quietly planning for my future and had secretly established a trust fund for me years before. When they finally revealed this to me and told me that I didn't have to worry about college, I was completely surprised. I couldn't believe someone cared enough to do this for me. I cried with excitement because, for the first time, I felt truly supported. It was surreal. No one had ever gone to such lengths to protect me. My grandparents not only saw my potential, but they also took steps to ensure that I could attend college without financial constraints. However, when my parents learned about the trust fund that my grandparents had established for me, they did not share my excitement or relief. Instead of being delighted for me, they immediately turned the conversation to Jackson. Their first query to my grandparents was if they had also established a trust fund for Jackson. My grandfather gently explained that they had intentionally chosen to care for me because my parents had always favored Jackson. They explained they had witnessed for years how I had been disregarded and wanted to give me a fair shot to thrive without being held back. Naturally, this did not sit well with my parents. They felt it was unfair and quickly got into a furious dispute with my grandparents about how both grandchildren should be treated equally. They accused my grandparents of favoritism and demanded that Jackson, as the youngest member of the family, deserved his share of the money. They couldn't believe my grandparents had chosen to help me because they saw how neglected I had been all these years. My parents seemed to be unaware that they had spent Jackson's entire life treating him as if he were the center of the universe. Despite the pressure and accusations, my grandparents held their stance. They refused to back down or let my parents manipulate the issue. They clarified that this was not about favoritism. Rather, it was about ensuring that I had the same opportunities as Jackson, opportunities my parents had clearly provided for him, but not for me. My grandparents made their decision out of love and fairness, knowing that I had not received the same attention and support that Jackson had. After failing to persuade my grandparents, my parents focused their efforts on me. They tried to persuade me to share some of the trust fund with them, claiming that I should invest in Jackson's future when he went to college. They portrayed it as if I was greedy for retaining the money for myself, despite the fact that it was not mine to give away. It was a gift from my grandparents. I refused. I informed them that it was not my obligation to care for Jackson's schooling, especially since they had always stated that their financial priority was with him. My parents were unhappy about my decision, but there was nothing they could do. For once, they did not have the upper hand. I wasn't going to give away what had been given to me out of love and care just because they thought Jackson deserved it all. It was a heartbreaking realization that even in this situation, my parents could not be happy for me. But it was also powerful because I understood I needed to stand up for myself, even if it meant defying my parents. As a result, my connection with my parents deteriorated significantly after I departed for college. They cut off practically all contact with me, convinced that what I had done was selfish toward my brother. Jackson and I had never been close. He was content being the preferred child, and with me out of the house, he didn't have to compete for our parents' attention. He never contacted or visited me when I was at college. While it was unsurprising, it still stung. My grandparents were the only ones that actually cared and remained in my life. They were my emotional support system, always checking in on me, encouraging me, and ensuring I didn't feel completely abandoned. But then, in my third year of college, my life was turned upside down. My grandfather died unexpectedly from a heart attack in his sleep. His death left me shattered. It was, without a doubt, the darkest period of my life. I spent several days with my grandmother while we mourned together. It was a devastating loss for both of us. My grandfather had been a father figure to me in every way that mattered, and losing him created a void in my heart. During this hard time, something unexpected happened. I bonded with my parents in Jackson. My grandfather's death shook all of us, and for the first time in years, we found ourselves connecting over our shared sadness. Despite my many unresolved issues with my parents, something about the incident brought us closer. For a brief moment, it felt as if the barriers between us had fallen. My grandfather had even left a letter for my mother. In it, he begged her to stop ignoring me and to care for both of her children, not just Jackson. He reminded her of the value of family and how she couldn't afford to continue treating one child better than the other for all these years. I guess something changed after that. Perhaps for the first time, my parents appeared to be genuinely sorry for how they had treated me. They slowly began to make an effort to reconnect. They began calling me more regularly, inquired about my studies, and showed an interest in my life. It wasn't perfect. The anguish of the past couldn't be erased that easily, but it was something. I was still upset with them for all the years they had disregarded me and for not being there when I needed them. But at the same time, I could see they were trying, which gave me a glimmer of optimism. I wanted to think that they could change, that perhaps, just maybe, They were beginning to recognize their mistakes. When I graduated from college, my parents actually attended the ceremony. They smiled proudly as they snapped pictures with me. It seemed odd to have them there after all those years when they hadn't even acknowledged my achievements. Following the ceremony, my parents, Jackson, my grandma, and I went out to lunch to celebrate. It was one of the few times I felt like we were a family, even if it was just for a short period. For once, I wasn't invisible to them, and that simple act of recognition meant more to me than words could describe. This year, after securing my first true high-paying job and earning my first big salary, I wanted to do something special to commemorate the occasion. I thought, why not share this moment with my family? I hadn't spent much time with my parents growing up, so I wanted to surprise them with something meaningful, a cruise excursion, only the three of us. There would be no distractions or obligations, simply quality time together to compensate for what we had missed over the years. Deep down, I knew I desired their attention, even after all these years of feeling overlooked. As for Jackson, I intended to get him something nice later so he wouldn't feel excluded. I wanted the cruise trip to be a surprise for my parents, so instead of notifying them over the phone, I made a reservation at a fine, costly restaurant where we could eat and celebrate. When I called to invite my parents, they appeared excited, even thrilled, to visit the restaurant. They promised to be there on time. But when I arrived at the restaurant on time, my parents were nowhere to be seen. At first, I attempted to give them the benefit of the doubt. Perhaps they were stuck in traffic or running a little late. However, after around 15, 20, and then 30 minutes, I began to feel worried. I contacted them several times, but they did not answer until the sixth call. My father casually remarked that they were finishing up some last-minute errands and would be at the restaurant soon. Annoyed but hopeful, I remained at the table, waiting for them. The waiter kept coming by, asking if the rest of my group had arrived, and I became increasingly humiliated with each passing minute. I didn't want to look like I'd been stood up in a fine restaurant. I eventually ordered dinner for myself since I was hungry. I finished my dinner while sitting alone, glancing at the empty seats across from me. My calls to my parents remained unanswered after that. An hour passed, followed by nearly 2 hours. Finally, on my 15th try, my father answered the phone. He began apologizing, but I was completely irritated by this point. I started yelling at him, wondering what they had been doing all this time and why they couldn't just tell me they weren't going to make it. "Oh, just stop complaining," he replied dismissively. "I apologize for the delay. Your mother and I were held up at the shop. We selected the ideal birthday present for your brother, but when we got to the counter, we discovered your mother had forgotten her card at home, so we had to drive back and grab it. Fortunately, the shop still had our gift, which we were able to purchase just now. Jackson is going to be overjoyed with what we picked out for him. By the way, have you purchased anything for your brother yet? You do recall that his birthday is in 2 weeks, right?" At that point, I felt like the wind had been knocked out of me. I was hoping to have a memorable moment with my parents, to celebrate my accomplishments and bring us closer together. But once again, Jackson was all that mattered to them. They had spent the entire evening shopping for his birthday gift, completely ignoring the fact that I had been sitting alone at the restaurant waiting for them. Not only had they missed the dinner, but they had the audacity to inquire whether I had thought to get something for Jackson. I was livid, but I tried to remain calm as I reminded my father that they could have shopped for Jackson any other day. They should have respected my time, especially because I went out of my way to prepare this for them. My father's response made matters worse. He dismissed my concerns, claiming they were on their way and that we could discuss it once they arrived. However, I did not want to stay there any longer. I was furious with my parents. I paid my bill, got up from the table, and left. My phone began to vibrate as I drove back home. My parents were calling and leaving voicemails stating they had arrived at the restaurant, but couldn't find me. I ignored their calls because I was too angry and hurt to even consider talking to them. Later that night, my mother sent me a series of texts. She attacked me rather than apologizing or admitting that they had made mistakes. She labeled me impolite for not being present when they finally arrived, as if I had wasted their time. She had the gall to claim that this was why they didn't care about my irrelevant intentions in the first place. I was always so impulsive, according to her. Their priorities were totally acceptable, and I was in the wrong for being furious with them. Reading her messages brought up memories of hurt and fury. I had put my heart and soul into planning something spectacular, and all I received in return was the same indifference I had felt my entire life. I simply couldn't deal with their cruel statements and frequent disregard for my feelings. After everything I had done to make this moment memorable, I felt much more alone than before. I knew that no matter what I did, Jackson would always come first, leaving me as an afterthought. I blocked her without bothering to respond. Update number 1. The reason I bought the cruise tickets in the first place was that my parents' conduct had changed significantly following my grandfather's death. I felt they'd finally recognized me as a human being and their child, but I suppose I was mistaken again. I'm glad my eyes are open now. Starting today, I'm done begging and crying for their attention. I will block both of them on my phone. Regarding the update, it appears that my parents have informed Jackson about the entire situation, and he called me this week to address it. My brother believes that our parents' actions were not improper and that I should have respected them enough to wait for their arrival rather than leaving abruptly. He added that our parents were quite disappointed in me and had contacted him to complain about my behavior. He invited me to his forthcoming birthday party so I could apologize to our parents. I declined his request, asking him to leave me alone for the time being. He tried to argue with me more, but I reminded him that my connection with our parents had nothing to do with him and that he would never comprehend what I was going through. Update number 2. It's been a month since I last updated. For those who inquired, I did consider canceling my cruise reservations, but then I realized I'd spent a large portion of my paycheck on them, so I decided to make better use of them. I chose to travel with my best friend and grandmother rather than my parents. To put it simply, the three of us had a fantastic time, and I quickly forgot about all the trouble with my parents. This trip provided a much-needed break for all of us. However, after the trip, when I shared a few photos from our cruise, I began receiving messages from my father on Facebook accusing me of being selfish and ungrateful for taking grandma on the vacation without inviting them. I had forgotten to block my parents on Facebook because I assumed they rarely used it. My father's audacity to ask me to take him, after everything he and mom had put me through, was staggering. He also mentioned how upset my mother was when I blocked her and how he wishes I would simply go to therapy and overcome my childish behavior so I could stop torturing them for the rest of their lives. Update number 3. Hello everyone. It has been 4 months since my previous update, and I am doing well. I've blocked both my parents and Jackson. I'll admit that since cutting them off, my life has become considerably calmer. I've learned to recognize that family isn't always biological. It's about who you choose. Surrounding yourself with supportive friends and loved ones has made a huge difference. My grandmother and I still have a terrific relationship, and I want to take her on additional vacations in the future. Thank you for watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do so and hit the notification bell to stay updated with more shocking real-life stories happening around you.